Today's lesson is An Angel in Disguise. Hi, everybody. My name is Roger.
And I'm Helen.
And today we're going to continue talking about our featured story, An Angel in Disguise, published in 1851 by the American author T.S. Arthur, Timothy Shea Arthur. And it's an old story, but it still has an important lesson for us to learn today, and that is the lesson of kindness.
Yes, the story does teach the lesson of kindness, how it's important to be kind. It also talks about alcoholism and how it can be a really bad thing. It ruins people's lives, and when parents are alcoholics, their children are affected. And perhaps there was a problem with alcoholism back then in the U.S. in the 1800s. And the writer, Timothy Shea Arthur, T.S. Arthur, was someone who wanted to spread the message of not drinking, of maintaining social order through abstinence. Abstinence is when you don't drink or do things that are bad for you.
So let's get to it, everybody. Let's continue to summarize our story for today. Let's listen to the first part, and then we'll come right back to summarize it.
Mr. Thompson's wife was as ill-tempered as he was kind, and he knew that, despite being unable to have children of her own, she wouldn't be pleased to have an addition to the household. When he arrived home with Maggie, he explained over his wife's protests that the girl would spend only a day there before heading to the poorhouse. Mrs. Thompson demanded that he take her there immediately, but after settling Maggie down in a spare bedroom, he explained his belief that those who help children, even in a small way, never go without reward. He became emotional as he described the state Maggie had been in, and Mrs. Thompson was moved.
各位好，第一部分我们看到介系词 despite 指尽管或是虽然，用法为 despite 加名词或是动词 ing。例如 Erica stopped by Roger's house despite knowing that he wasn't home. 虽然知道 Roger 不在家， Erica 还是顺道去了他家。另外补充同义片语 in spite of in spite of in spite of 指尽管或是即使。举例来说 In spite of a headache, Rachel still led the afternoon meeting. 尽管头痛Rachel 还是主持了下午的会议。或是 I played in the basketball game in spite of my injured ankle. 尽管我脚踝受伤，我还是有打这场篮球赛。接着我们看到单字 protest， 这个字是名词，指反对或是抗议。例如 I ignored Lucy's protests and gave her the present anyways. 我无视 Lucy 的反对，还是把礼物给她。另外，这个字也可以作为动词，做动词时也可以念作 protest， 指抗议或是反对。我们可以说 The workers at the factory protested against a cut in their pay. 这间工厂的员工反对薪资缩减。再来，我们看到动词 demand， 指要求。举例来说 Angie demanded that Barney return the book that he had borrowed from her. Angie 要求 Barney 把之前跟他借的书还给他。也可以说 Roberta demanded a discount on her hotel room because of the noise in an adjoining suite. Roberta 因为隔壁的套房噪音太吵，而要求旅馆房价打折。另外，这个字也可以作为名词，表示要求或是需求，像是 World demand for oil seems to be growing. 全球对石油的需求似乎不断成长。或是 The factory increased production to meet the growth in demand. 那间工厂增加产量来符合增长的需求。再补充一个含有 demand 在内的片语 in demand， 意思是有需求的或是受欢迎的。我们可以说 This cool smartphone is in high demand right now, so many stores sell it. 这只酷炫智慧型手机现在很抢手，所以很多店都有卖。或者 The new toy was in poor demand because most kids didn't like it. 这款玩具因为不受多数儿童的喜爱，所以销售量差。最后我们看到单字 spare， 这个字是形容词， 指闲置的、多余的或是备用的。举例来说 Do you have any spare change that I can borrow? 你有多的零钱可以借我吗？或是 Megan can sleep in our spare bedroom. Megan 可以睡在我们多的那间卧室。
So in the last lesson, we saw that Mr. Thompson decided to take Maggie in because he felt sorry for her. Now, that seems like the story could end right there. There's a happy ending. However, there's a problem, and that is with Mr. Thompson's wife. It says in the first line, Mr. Thompson's wife was as ill-tempered as he was kind. And he knew that despite being unable to have children of her own, she wouldn't be pleased to have an addition to the household. So there's a lot of information in this sentence. First of all, in the first part, it says Mr. Thompson's wife was as ill-tempered as he was kind. So we know that Mr. Thompson is kind, but we also find out here that his wife, Mrs. Thompson, is ill-tempered. To be ill-tempered means that you have a bad temper. You might be rude, impatient, and you get angry easily. So Mrs. Thompson gets angry easily. She's not very agreeable. And the sentence pattern here, as ill-tempered as he was kind, is making a comparison. So just as Mr. Thompson was kind, as much as he was kind, so Mrs. Thompson was ill-tempered.
Right. So, of course, we got the comparison there. I'm as tall as you. I'm as smart as you, etc., etc. But if we're talking about each person having different special qualities, then we can also use this pattern. She was as ill-tempered as he was kind. She's a hothead. He's a nice guy. I could also say the prince is as handsome as the princess is beautiful. But in this particular case, he's really kind and she's really ill-tempered. So I wonder how their marriage can last all this time.
Yep, and there's another thing. Mr. Thompson knew that despite being unable to have children of her own, she wouldn't be pleased to have an addition to the household. So, in other words, Mrs. Thompson can't have children. She's unable to have children. But even though she can't have children, she wouldn't be happy to have Maggie in her house. So here, despite being unable to have children refers to Mrs. Thompson. And the word despite means in spite of, or even though, as in even though something is the case, even though she can't have children of her own, she wouldn't be happy to have an addition to the household.
So again, an addition to something is just another person living in your house. Sometimes people say this if you're a young couple and you say, hey, we're expecting an addition to our household. In other words, I'm pregnant and I'm going to have a baby. We're going to have a new member of the family. So you could say it that way, to have an addition to the household. Household refers to your home, the people, and the actual building itself.
Right. So, for instance, you go to the household registration office here in Taiwan when you have a baby because you have to register this new addition to your household, or when someone dies because you need to tell the household registration office that someone needs to be taken off the register because that person no longer exists. So that's an example of the use of the word household. So when Mr. Thompson arrived home with Maggie, he explained over his wife's protests that the girl would spend only a day there before heading to the poorhouse.
Okay, so we can imagine this scenario here. He's bringing Maggie home, and then we have his wife protesting. If you protest, that means you say you don't like something. Hey, why are you doing that? I don't like that. I disagree. I protest. So in this particular case, she was probably complaining, what are you bringing that girl home? We don't have enough room for another person in here. You don't make enough money. We can't support 3 people here. We don't even have an extra room. This is ridiculous. So, of course, he explained this while she was protesting. He explained explained over his wife's protests that the girl would only spend a day there. Now, calm down, dear. Okay, I know you're upset, but she's just going to be here for one day. Tomorrow, first thing, I'm going to take her someplace else. So all you have to do is bear it for just one day. You just have to accept this situation for just one day. And, of course, then Maggie would go to the poorhouse.
That's right. So protest here is the noun form of the verb to protest, and it's said in exactly the same way. A protest is basically what you say when you protest something or against something. And Mrs. Thompson demanded that he take her there immediately, but after settling Maggie down in a spare bedroom, he explained his belief that those who help children, even in a small way, never go without reward. So Mrs. Thompson at first asked her husband to bring Maggie to the poorhouse immediately. Actually, she didn't ask him, she demanded. So when you demand something, you're saying it, you're asking for something in a very direct and very strong manner. For instance, if you're unhappy with the service in the store, you can say to the clerk, I demand to see your manager, which means I'm telling you to bring your manager out here so that I can speak with that person, so that I can complain. So Mrs. Thompson is demanding that Mr. Thompson take Maggie immediately to the poorhouse.
Exactly. But after settling Maggie down in a spare bedroom, he explained his belief that those who help children, even in a small way, never go without reward. So it turns out they do have a spare bedroom in the house after all. Spare is extra. Of course, if you're driving your car, you'll have a spare tire in the trunk of your car. In the back of your car, you have a spare tire back there, an extra tire. And in this particular household, they have a spare bedroom. Maybe it's a guest bedroom or something like that. And while he was settling Maggie in that spare bedroom, he explained that he believed that if you help children, even if you help them a little bit, you will be rewarded. So, yeah, to never go without reward is just a fancy way of saying you will be rewarded. You will be rewarded by God or whoever. You will have good karma or whatever because you do a good deed. Here, reward is being used as a noun. A reward is something you get for doing something nice for somebody. And it's different from the word award. If you participate in a speech competition or in some kind of sporting event, you will get an award. But if you do something nice for somebody, like if you help them find their lost puppy or something, then they may offer you a reward.
Right. So a reward could also be money that you get in exchange for doing something good, like returning a lost puppy. So Mr. Thompson became emotional as he described the state Maggie had been in, and Mrs. Thompson was moved. So Mr. Thompson is a very kind person, and he's very sensitive. Just by describing the state that Maggie was in, he was able to become emotional. Maybe he became teary-eyed, tears appeared in his eyes, and he felt really bad. And Mrs. Thompson, seeing him like this and hearing his description of Maggie's condition, felt sorry for her too. She was moved, which means she felt sorry for her. She's not as hard as she first was when he brought her into their home. And she decided to let Mr. Thompson get his way and allow Maggie to stay.
Okay, so that sounds like a good turn of events. She's starting to soften up a little bit here. So maybe Maggie can stay more than just one day. Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our explanation for today. Let's move on now to the second part and continue to summarize our story.
Without a word, Mrs. Thompson went into the bedroom to sit with Maggie. Sensing something in her had changed, Mr. Thompson left his wife alone with the girl and went to work, and when he returned, he found the two chatting happily. Over dinner, Mrs. Thompson asked if it would be acceptable for Maggie to stay another day, given her weak condition.
So, Mrs. Thompson has allowed Maggie to stay at their home for the time being. Now, without a word, Mrs. Thompson went into the bedroom to sit with Maggie. So, they had put Maggie in the spare bedroom, and Maggie, being bedridden, which means she has to stay in bed because she can't walk or get up by herself, Mrs. Thompson decided to go in and sit with her, to maybe talk to her, to keep her company, to see what this child is actually like, because after all, she doesn't know Maggie.
That's right. So without a word, Mrs. Thompson went into the bedroom to sit with Maggie, and sensing something in her had changed, Mr. Thompson left his wife alone with the girl and went to work. And when he returned, he found the two chatting happily. So Mr. Thompson kind of sensed that there was something that was different in his wife. Usually she's kind of ill-tempered, but he could tell that when his wife went into the room with little Maggie, she was a different person. Maybe she was softening up. She wasn't such an evil person after all. So he decided to let the two of them be by themselves in the room and maybe have some bonding there, maybe get to know each other, have a little conversation or something like that. So he left his wife alone with the girl, and then he went back to work. And then when he came back to the room to check on them, hey, they were having a nice, wonderful conversation.
Right. So they were chatting happily. So they were talking and they were laughing and having a good time in each other's company. Then over dinner, Mrs. Thompson asked if it would be acceptable for Maggie to stay another day, given her weak condition. So initially, Maggie was supposed to stay only overnight, only for one night, before she would be taken to the poorhouse. But after having spent the entire day with Maggie, chatting with her and getting to know her better, Mrs. Thompson now thinks it's a better idea to have Maggie stay another day. She likes to have Maggie in her house, but she says Maggie should stay another day given her weak condition.
Right. Given here just means considering. So yeah, considering the fact that she's weak, maybe she should stay another day. I could also say, for example, given the fact that Don has a history of alcohol abuse, maybe we should fire him from his current position. Okay, given or considering that. So in this particular case, maybe Maggie can stay another day, and I have a feeling that she's probably going to be staying much longer than that. Okay, let's move on now to the third part of our lesson for today and find out how things wrap up.
One day turned into 2, 2 days turned into a week, and a week turned into the rest of their lives. Maggie would always have a home with the Thompsons after melting Mrs. Thompson's formerly cold heart.
So in the last part, Mrs. Thompson suggested to her husband to let Maggie stay for another day. So one day turned into 2, 2 days turned into a week, and a week turned into the rest of their lives. So basically, they kept on extending the time that Maggie would stay with them. At first, she was only supposed to stay an extra day, and then the 2 days turned into a week. And after a week, Maggie began to grow on them, and they grew attached to her, and she probably grew attached to them. So they decided to let her stay on forever for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, the problem wasn't Mr. Thompson. He's already a kind guy. He's already taken care of there. The problem was Mrs. Thompson. She's very ill-tempered, but still Mr. Thompson had faith in his wife. He knew that as she had a soft spot in there somewhere, all she had to do was spend time with Maggie, and it would melt her cold, cold heart, and they would become the best of friends. So yeah, one day turned into 2, 2 days turned into a week turned into the rest of their lives, and Maggie would always have a home with the Thompsons after melting Mrs. Thompson's formerly cold heart. So indeed, sometimes you have a heart of stone or a cold, cold heart. And of course, when you become soft, when you're not such a bad person anymore, then we say your cold heart has melted. And Mrs. Thompson now is a nice woman, and Maggie has a home for the rest of her life. But I'm kind of curious as to what happened to the other kids. John, of course, was a farm laborer, and and the middle child had to be a maid, so I don't know if that's necessarily a better predicament.
That's true. Perhaps out of all of the siblings, Maggie ended up having the best life because she was there taken care of by people who loved her rather than seeing her as somebody useful later on.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of our story for today. It's time now to listen to our Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第一部分写到，当 Mr. Thompson 带 Maggie 回家时，面对妻子的反对， Mr. Thompson 解释说，这个女孩只会在这里待一天就会到济贫院。文中他用到 protest 这个名词来表达反对，我们来学习它的字首字根。好， test 这个部分呢，它当字根它有 witness 的意思，表示见证人、证物、证词等等。那么在 protest 这个字当中，它的字首 pro 表示往前，字根 test 表示证明。同学们可以试着用挺身向前来证明自己的清白，或者是挺身向前来证明自己的论点，去联想说 protest 它有反对或抗议的意思。好，那顺便补充几个有相同字根的单字。第一个是 contest， contest 它的字首 con 表示一起，那么字根 test 表示见证。那一起见证是什么意思呢？同学们可以想象，在法律诉讼的攻防战里面，提告和被告双方都需要召唤证人，都会找人一起来见证他们的说辞是不是对的嘛。那我们从这个场景去联想说 contest 它当动词有争辩抗辩的意思，当名词则是指竞争竞赛。那补充一下， contest 当动词它还有一个念法是 contest。 好，再我们看到第二个补充的是 detest， D-E-T-E-S-T， 它的字首 D-E 表示向下，字根 test 表示证词。同学们可以想象，在听到对自己不利的证词啊，或是听到伪证的时候，你就会想要谴责对方，请神请替公杯啊，往下看看，见证那个人有多么厌恶，令人憎恨。我们用这样的方式去联想到 detest 它有憎恨嫌恶的意思。好，第三个补充的是 testify， T-E-S-T-I-F-Y。 好，它的字根 T-E-S-T 表示见证， I-F-Y 是动词字尾，合在一起 testify 就有作证证明的意思咯。那么课文接着写到说， Mrs. Thompson demanded that he take her there immediately。 Mrs. Thompson 要求他立刻把 Maggie 带去那里。那同学们有没有注意到句子里面的动词 demanded 它是用过去式，但是后方 that 子句里面却用 he take不是原形动词吗？好，其实在这边 take 的前面是省略了 should。 英文里面有一些动词呢，他们后面就是可以接 that 主词加上 should 再加原形动词，然后 should 可以省略，只保留后方的原形动词。那这些动词呢，我们大致上可以分成4种类型。第一种是表达建议，像是 suggest、 propose、 advise、 recommend。那么第二种是表达坚持啊，或是坚决要求，像 insist。 第三个是表达要求请求的类别，像是 demand、 require、 request、 ask、 urge。 那么第四个是表达命令的动词 order、 command 等等。那这些呢，我们就是可以加上 that 主词加上 should 再加原形动词，然后 should 可以省略。我们就来造2个例句。 The man demanded that I apologize to him。 那名男子要求我向他道歉，那么 apologize 前面省略了 should。 She suggested that we take a different route home。 她建议我们走另一条路回家，这边 we take 中间也是省略了 should。 好，那以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天单字吧。
Despite having a degree in history, Jade was unable to find a good job. Household. Most American households have at least one car. Protest. Catherine ignored her son's protests and turned off the TV. Demand. When the clerk got her order wrong, Karen demanded to see the manager. Spare. It's a good idea to take some spare batteries when you go camping. Reward. Robert's mother bought him an ice cream as a reward for doing well on his test.
Discussion starter starts now!
Here's our discussion starter for today. The question is, what do you think the moral of the story is?
Well, I think that the moral of the story is when you do something kind for a child, no matter how small that action is, you will get something great in return, because a lot of adults today who have problems in society, whether they're criminals or they have problems with drugs, who are unhappy, usually come from situations in childhood that weren't ideal. So it's important for adults to be kind to children so that the children can grow up to be good adults, and that way we have a good society.
Well, I think the story teaches us that alcohol, of course, is evil, but other vices are evil as well, like drug addiction or gambling and things like that. So yes, of course, there are lots of things that we become involved with that cause problems for other people. So yeah, we need to be less selfish and think about others more often. Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoyed reading along with us. I am Roger.
I'm Helen.
See you next time.